Bills Mafia, football fans alike, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa, and you can find me on Twitter at show_DeRosa. Tonight's name is Joe Routes. Why? Because we're going to be talking about offense, what this Buffalo Bills offense could potentially look like in 2024, with a lot of questions looming, a lot of new additions, and a lot of departures. I felt that it would be a fun time to talk about what we realistically could see from the Bills under Joe Brady this upcoming season. And you know that there was only one person that I could get for this episode, and that is Cover One's very own Mount Rushmore member, Anthony Prohaska. And the two of us will be getting in depth on what we can expect from the team in this upcoming season. I appreciate you all so very much for being here. And without further ado, let's go.
Previous play will go under review.
Once again, friends, esteemed colleagues, joiners of the show, new guests, new watchers of the show, thank you all so much for being here again. My name is Joe DeRosa. I appreciate you. If you appreciate me, if you appreciate this network, feel free to drop a like on this video. It would be greatly appreciated. And joining me tonight is Pro DeRosa, right, who is here to talk about the offense. Anthony, thank you so much for first surprising me with this excellent name and for being here. I appreciate your time greatly. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I enjoy every time you ask me to come back and we get to do this. I'm annoyed I didn't come up with the Pro DeRosa thing the first time I was here. So it's taken me a couple times to kind of get through it. But yeah, I'm here. It makes me laugh every time I see it. So I appreciate you acknowledging it. And thank you for the kind words in the intro. I'm pumped to talk about why MVS is the true savior and wide receiver one of this team and Super Bowl aspirations and all that stuff.
Yeah, you know, when I wrote the notes for this episode, it was really just, you know, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to see? But then the Bills signed MVS, and it was as if the clouds departed in the sky and the sun came down, and I realized we're going to win the Super Bowl and have the best offense in NFL history. But let's talk about it a little bit more. The team signs Marquez Valdes-Scantling to a one-year deal. I believe it's worth up to $4 million if he clears incentives. Yeah. Obviously, this was a skill set that, one, fits the size profile of what the team seems to be seeking, but also adds a speed element that we have said the team was kind of looking for. So what do you think about the signing and what it could really indicate for the room itself?
I think it's a move to round out the wide receiver room, to raise the floor, basically anything and everything that is not sexy and anything and everything that is not what most fans want, which is like, you know, announce the trade for Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel or T. Higgins or whatever everybody's been clamoring for. I just think it's also a realistic move with where the Bills are financially. And it goes, I think, hand in hand with what we've seen this offseason of trying to cobble together improvements or tweaks or adjustments or trying to mitigate losses and doing what you can while being somewhat financially hamstrung, given where the Bills were from a cap standpoint. But I think the move is fine. It adds another skill set and dynamic to this room. You know, he's got that blocking ability. He's got a vertical stretch ability. I think it also gives you kind of some like Keon, Coleman, not necessarily insurance, but I think support for things you might lean into him with. Kind of gives you someone in that Gabe Davis role that you can use in those reduced alignments and kind of those condensed looks that allows, you know, someone to block down and on an edge or dig out a safety. And then again, he does have that vertical stretch ability. Now, whether or not he's going to catch it when he gets downfield, I guess is a different conversation based on what he was in 2023. But I think overall, again, it's a move for the wide receiver room. I'm not angry with it. I'm not in love with it. I think it's a move to, again, just continue to add to this basketball lineup at wide receiver that the Bills have been trying to do. I do think it falls somewhat in line with, you know, a larger theme that we'll be talking about as the episode goes along in terms of this Bills identity and offensive direction going forward. But yeah, I'm whelmed. Like, it's a move. He's a professional. He's got experience. I think he fits a niche or a role that can have value, and it is what it is. Like, he's going to end up being, I don't know, wide receiver 3 at best, but probably 4 or 5 in that range. And That's fine.
Mhm. Yeah, I like this comment from Welf Wilson Sr. interjecting. I was expecting John Perry as the guest on a show called Under Review. One day, I just have to earn enough notoriety to do that. So catch this in about maybe 15 years, 20 years, and I still won't have him on.
You
But
got to get
anyway,
Gene. You got to get Gene Steratore. You got to get the man himself. Like that would
if
just be you. Every episode needs to have, or you need to have a segment where like you say something potentially offensive and it goes to like a real referee, or just something that needs to be under review on the show called Under Review. Like it just we need that segment.
these are the workshops that I haven't had on about this show yet. I've been doing it a certain format, but I'm open to all ideas. And if getting Gene Steratore to tell me something's offensive that I said it is going to get the views, I'm with it. But
whenever it gets the clicks, man.
Whatever gets the clicks, man. And to go off your point, I feel the same way as far as being whelmed, if you want to call it that. It's not the move that's going to move the needle too much in either direction for me. But one thing that you and I have spoken about when we message, or if we're talking about just this room itself post-draft, was that this team had a lot of middle of the field options, had a lot of people who seem to excel, whether that's going laterally, whether that's in the shorter parts of the field, work in the slot, or something along those lines. But it didn't feel like they had a burner. And even though it's not, again, one of those high tier premium receivers that will be available in free agency this upcoming year, or were potentially up for trade, it's a speedy threat. And I think that it's going to be a net positive for the room, because it's not like you're asking this guy to catch, 6, 8, however many passes a game. In my eyes, what I think he is more than anything else is just a decoy, someone that can go up the field, someone that can, again, like you mentioned, whether it's taking that Gabe Davis role and using it with someone who has the size, has the speed, and even with the drop concern, still being someone that if you're going in man-to-man, having to pull the man and being able to clear up other parts of the field. And it's why I'm a fan of it, even if it isn't the most like crazy move. And I'm not, going to sit here and tell you MVS really is like, when I actually mean it when I say this is they're going to win the Super Bowl because they made the signing. It's probably not going to be that impactful when you talk about overall stats or what his numbers look like at the end of the year. But I'm cool with it just for having that type of presence in the room, having someone who, with the experience of winning a Super Bowl and playing with Patrick Mahomes, and now you kind of get that insight into that team in your room, in addition of having a skill set, which I think you needed. I'm fine with it. And one thing I do want to bring up, I pulled up the tweet that Eric actually tweeted earlier today. So Eric mentioned that MVS had a 5.8% drop rate over the last 2 seasons. He got that from True Media. But one thing that he mentioned in the follow-up, 6 out of 8 of MVS's drops over the last 2 seasons were from 0 to 9 yards, which I thought was an interesting stat, because
kind of like Xavier Worthy from Texas, where a lot of those drops are coming underneath, ironically.
Yeah. Oh no, I hear the sirens. They're coming. The Chiefs fans are.
Mm-hmm.
But like it's still a concern to me. I still worry about the hands downfield. But I also think, again, if you're on a limited role where you're just running deep, like, hey, MVS, go upfield, just take it away. Mm-hmm. And you get the occasional target, I'm fine with it. It's not going to really make or break me. I just hope he doesn't do it in an inopportune time. But that seems to be the luck we've had lately. So who knows? But any final thoughts on this, Ant, before we move on?
No, I think this is more of a higher profile move than like the Chase Claypool signing or the Cephas signing. But I just see a lot of people getting up in arms with like each one of these signings, and there's just varying levels of. That's a great comment from RJ. If we still had Diggs, we would have the deepest wide receiver room of all time. It's like we have 4 wide receiver 2s, 4 wide receiver 3s, and 10 wide receiver 4s. Yeah, and a lot of these moves. That goes hand in hand with what I was about to say. Like a lot of these moves just come with almost the idea of you're just trying to round out the room and you're trying to fill, okay, wide receiver 4, 5, and 6, and potentially wide receiver 3, although I don't think so. Like you're trying to see what you can fill out, who has special teams value, or who can occupy specific roles or wear multiple hats. And that's just the state of where the Bills are. Like financially, they cannot afford to make the moves that we would like to see them make for the wide receiver room. And it is funny how much of this is shaped by the Stephon Diggs conversation, because, and even with Keon Coleman, which we'll get into in a minute, like I like the addition of Keon Coleman so much if Stephon Diggs is the 1 and then Kincaid is the 2. Like I love that skill set and dynamic as an addition or as an auxiliary piece to Diggs and Kincaid, more so than I do to just Kincaid and where he may be wide receiver 1. It's funny how much like how much it's changed or shaped the conversation and the viewpoint for myself. And I know for a lot of people, just having Stephon Diggs versus taking him out and then what's resulted.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you mentioned that too, because this whole, post Diggs era, it feels far more like a pivot than anything they had ever planned. Because you remember Brandon Beane making those comments a few months back where they brought up Diggs in conversation and mentioned how he's going to have a big role, like he's working already to like have it, like things of that. I can't remember these specific comments, so I'm paraphrasing, but I really don't believe that this organization thought Diggs was gone when the offseason started. I truly think that he was a part of the plan until he wasn't, because something, whatever it may have been, stirred up enough trouble to make a trade actually happen. Again, taking a $31 million dead cap to the chin, you don't really want to do that unless you feel like you absolutely have to, which they did. So I think this is just the aftermath of it. And these moves that are getting made are really just trying to kind of pick up the pieces and still put a product out despite losing him. But one thing that I kind of think about this, and I'm actually curious, we haven't even gotten to the crux of this discussion, but I'm like, this is something I wanted to ask you when we went live. Do you feel like this signing is kind of reflective of Joe Brady's outlook of a vertical threat in this offense? And I don't mean that it's not important, but rather that it doesn't need to be what you feed your offense through to be successful. Like it could have been with Diggs in years past, where he was kind of the focal point. But when Brady takes over, even though Diggs is still getting involved, still pulling things away, it's kind of like it doesn't really matter if Diggs is your focal point because someone's going to be available and there's going to be an option. Like, does this, in your mind, almost reflect what Joe Brady feels about deep threats in this offense, or do you feel differently about that?
I think it either reflects what he feels about deep threats in this offense, or it reflects the direction this offense is going in, because and I don't mean this disrespectfully at all. Like it feels as though speed or verticality is not one of the primary traits or skill set pieces you are looking for in the top end of the depth chart. If you are Joe Brady, it looks very much more like he is, sorry for that crazy. I'm getting so many cars that are driving by making so much loud noise today on the street. I don't know what the hell is going on.
It's all good.
It's my fault for leaving the windows open.
You're good. Real quick, my roommate's heating a metal pan because he's seasoning it right now, I guess, like one of those specials. So if the smoke alarm starts going off, I'm muting my mic and I'm going to go wave a towel. So if you just see me leave, that's why. Sorry.
That's fine. I'll hold the fort down and just I'll figure it out. It just, no disrespect to Keon Coleman, but not a burner downfield. And Kincaid isn't a burner downfield, although he is athletic and is a good mover and is fast for a tight end. But I think just with what we look at, really the only vertical speed in the top like 4 pass catching options really is Curtis Samuel. And I know what his time 40 is. I don't think he necessarily plays that fast on tape, but yeah, I think it's either indicative of what he values in terms of a vertical threat, or the direction the offense is going in, and the way that he will threaten vertically is going to come from more of a schematic presentation or schematic results than it is because of just, hey, I got this dude on the outside who can fly, let's get it to him. So it's reflective of something which we won't know until the season comes through, but it's either the direction that he views for this offense, or in terms of what he values at the wide receiver position. And again, this is a guy who comes from the Sean Payton learning tree. Sean Payton's wide receiver 1 for years was Marcus Colston, not a burner. Dude came from Hofstra, big body guy. This is like wide receivers that were like Marcus Colston and Devery Henderson. And the offense ran through Jimmy Graham and would find a way to get Pierre Thomas like 75 catches every single year. And you worked in Deuce McAllister and Reggie Bush and all these guys like the Mark Ingrams and the Alvin Kamaras, and how much running backs were involved out of the backfield. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, James Cook and Ray Davis. So think about, I think a lot of people think of Joe Brady as the architect of that LSU offense with Burrow and CEH and Randy Moss's kid and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and Terrace Marshall and all those dudes. And that's fair. They were like a spread, cut you up. And granted, the Saints had some of that option too, but think about Sean Payton and what he does and who he is. That's where Joe Brady cut his teeth. And so I think, it's going to be interesting to see, because what we have in this wide receiver room is a significant departure from what has been previously with this regime.
And people are looking at the wide receiver room on paper, and obviously without Stephon Diggs, it's questionable because Curtis Samuel, I like his production, but when you talk about alpha wide receiver. He's much more of a complementary piece than he would be someone leading the room. Khalil Shakir had his explosive plays and flashes, but is it the type of person you can actually depend and lean on, or is it just flashes that you're going to get from time to time? Because a lot of passes didn't go his way, maybe because he wasn't open, maybe because he wasn't a part of the progression initially. But then there's a lot of other things that I think when you look at the room itself, you have to keep context of, like you just mentioned, the running backs, like James Cook, Ray Davis, and Ty Johnson, I think are all going to get meaningful targets. You incorporate Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox and potential 12P, they're getting fed too. It's not just wide receivers, it's going to be everyone. And you better be ready to catch the ball, because you and I are catching passes from Josh Allen next season. Like, that's how I envision it. And I want to segue over to this next topic, aka the first topic I originally had for the show before MBS got signed. But a full offseason of Joe Brady installation. Obviously, you see him in the second half of last year. You see the pivots that weren't necessarily anything like that wasn't already in the playbook, but more of a lead on certain things that maybe they weren't doing as much with Ken Dorsey, maybe more of like situational awareness and improvement in that regard. But we've talked about this, and I know your feelings on Joe Brady. So I'm curious just what you think a full off season of Joe Brady's installation actually looks like, and what you could expect given the personnel decisions they've made.
Oh, it's a fun question. I think we started to see some smatterings of it or semblance of it last year. And I think it's a great piece to lead with and continue to drive home, because, and I'm not saying this positively or negatively for Brady or for Dorsey, that wasn't Joe Brady's offense that the Bills are running down the stretch, just because it is impossible to uninstall and install a new offense in a week or 2 weeks. Like, even if you had a 2-week bye week, it's still not happening. So it was Ken Dorsey's offense that Brady was running, just with his sequencing or his layering or little tweaks here and there, like what he was able to do with James Cook out of the backfield, or maybe a player preference, like working in Ty Johnson, who no one expected. Like, everyone was sitting here being like, man, like, I wonder if he's going to unlock Deontay Hardy. And Joe Brady was like, nope, it's Ty Johnson who I'm unlocking. Like, that's what we're doing. And so I think a full offseason of, that installation, I think it's going to be largely determined by the direction that this offense is going. But I think it looks a lot like scrapping a lot of the half field reads from Allen, in terms of, and I've talked about it much in the film room. Eric has talked about it. I've talked about it. Like, instead of just being like, hey, this side over here is for this coverage, this side over here is for this coverage, on the snap, read it out, and then figure it out from there. I think things are going to be more flowy and comprehensive from a progression standpoint, full field reads, and also scheming some things up for the running backs. I think that's going to be a heavily prevalent piece. I also wonder how much the screen game comes into play with what Keon Coleman does, with how good Ray Davis is in terms of that piece. But I think a full offseason just looks like tearing it down and us seeing something different just with what we've seen from the roster and knowing who Joe Brady is. I think that could potentially be good, just given the nature of how cyclical football is and what defenses do and how they try to swing the pendulum in their favor. So what the offense tries to do to swing it back. That's the comment right there from David. Like, the Bills offense should be doing a lot more play action. That's what, I think a full offseason installation looks like: more condensed alignments, more heavier personnel packages. And instead of threatening defenses from a vertical standpoint, traditionally with fast guys or burners, you threaten them vertically by running them out of too high coverages, forcing them into single high looks, and or creating mismatches or advantages, and then taking your shots vertically off of that. Not necessarily because, hey, Dalton Kincaid runs a 4.3 40, but it's like, well, Kincaid is way faster than that safety who's covering him. That's how we can get downfield. Yeah. Or Keon Coleman has a 5'9", 185-pound corner on him. We're going to throw a 50-50 ball downfield, and that's how we're going to gain 35 yards on this play. And just trying to use that play action to build off the run game, which is going to be significantly important, I think, to this offense, and then using the play action game to generate explosives, as opposed to airing it out and spreading it out, which has been tough given the too high concept structures that defenses are using to put a cap on the Bills offense and offenses in general.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because I keep saying I'm glad you brought it up, but you keep hitting the points that I'm about to get to. And every time, no, it's good, because whenever you come on the show, it always keeps the conversation flowing, because I'll be thinking of something and you'll say it and I'll be like, all right, hell yeah, I got my thing going, let's go. And with that, what I will say is the that was kind of why I wanted to get into this topic too, because one thing that you've talked about and a lot of people in our network have spoken about before is the change in defensive structure really league wide, and how, again, those two high shells, bringing two back and just trying to take away the explosive plays and seeing the Bills offense essentially, at least going downfield, suffer as a result. This almost feels like with Joe Brady, there's going to be a concerted effort to pivot from, well, we got to stretch it vertically. We got to go downfield. We got our alpha guys. We got Gabe, who's going to run the boundary, and Steph, who can run it, and we'll have a slot guy, to let's just enforce our presence at the line of scrimmage. Let's have a bunch of options for the middle of the field that can get open in these quick hits, especially against man coverage, because I trust Kincaid, I trust Samuel, I even trust Shakir to be able to do that. And I definitely trust Keon Coleman in short space to get open with his size and where I think he excels, which is kind of in that role of, like, if you want to call him a power slot or someone that you just have going over the middle of the field to be an enforcer there. I'm not worried about this team in that regard at all. And I am very excited to see how they kind of reemerge as this team that wants you to respect their run first, because for so many seasons, we kind of lack that in a way. And it's not that they didn't have successful running concepts or successful running backs or anything. It's just, it felt hit or miss. It felt like because Allen's throwing the ball a ton, it's kind of our afterthought. We'll go to it when we need to go to it, but really, like, Allen is the identity. Now, I'm not saying they're going to stop having Josh Allen's super alien quarterback be the identity, but more so that James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, all viable options. At least we'll see if Ray Davis is, but I can trust James Cook and Ty Johnson, at least in this regard, with semi-different styles to each one that complement each other in different ways, where I think they are going to lean on that run a bit more. And I think fans and people might be concerned that they're doing that. But one thing that I've noticed, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree with this, was it felt like the Bills many times last year ended up in those second and long, third and long situations. And it feels like to me a pivot with Joe Brady, where you are not only running, but maybe making more of an effort on early downs to get some sort of really power run game, or however you want to talk about it, to get them into those better situations so that when they have to introduce any sort of pass, whatever formation they're in, it might be a little more attainable. Is that something you've seen, or do you feel differently?
No, I think the emphasis on the run game is going to be an important piece for this year. And it was one of my biggest frustrations with Dorsey, going back to, actually, that was my biggest frustration with Dorsey. I feel like a lot of things from a passing standpoint, as well done, Sale. I like that. Nice disguised coverage inclusion there. I think for as much of the struggles from the passing game had to do with Dorsey, which is a legitimate piece, I think a lot of them could also fall on the shoulders of Josh Allen. And if Allen was just better, granted, it's Dorsey's job to make Allen better and put him in this position to succeed and so on and so forth. But I feel like it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other at times when it came to that. My biggest gripe with Dorsey was just not going to the run game enough and as often, like holistically across like the back end of 2022, but then even just like in certain pivots, in moments, in games where the passing offense was struggling and it was sluggish, whether it was on early downs or in certain parts of the field. And it was just like, you have this good run game, pivot to it, lean on it, use it. I expect to see more of that this year, just with how the roster is shaping up and what the Bills run game looked like last year. It just seems like a natural pivot given the pendulum swinging happening large scale between offenses and defenses. And then, what the Bills are seeing, like the Bills are seeing these two high coverage structures and all this man coverage. And so I think the thought for people was, okay, get some speed and get some guys who can win one-on-one and separate. And the Bills are like, nope, we're going to go big and we're going to run the football. And that's what we're going to do. And then teams aren't going to be able to play too high because they need a safety in the box. And also teams want to play nickel defenses, and that means they're going to be at a disadvantage with their nickel corner in there, unless their nickel corner is a good run fitter, which there aren't a ton of those. And then also they're probably lighter on the interior defensive line because most teams have gone with like a one gap penetrating style up front and to try and get after quarterbacks. So now we're going to push around your 305 or 300-pound defensive tackle because he's smaller, and we're going to people move him on the inside, and we're going to zig where you've zagged and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting how it's come together, and with what it looks like right now, with what the offense was last year, with how they're built, with how good the run game is, and then with the size and frame aspect to all these wide receiver additions the Bills have brought in, it just seems like more of a pivot to the run game. And I think that's a good thing. Like it's an easy thing. Run the ball, play action, use your running backs, make life easy for Josh Allen, and then attack him from there.
Yeah, and shout out to Just the Tip of Canoe right here. I appreciate this. Thank you so much for your super chat. That's an awesome name. And let's see. This question says, do you guys think Brady will use Curtis Samuel out of the backfield as much as he did with the Panthers? And how will they use Ray Davis? So, and I'll let you take this one. I'll
Oh,
follow up.
I do think they will use Curtis Samuel like that. I don't know how much, just because what you have in James Cook and with Ray Davis out of the backfield, but Curtis Samuel, I think to get the ball in his hands, and I don't mean this as a knock against him. I think and I said it when he was signed, Curtis Samuel's production, I think, is on Joe Brady to scheme him open and use him with his skill set. I don't think Curtis Samuel is necessarily like, oh, just, Curtis, just go get us a bucket. Like, I don't think he's that type of guy. I think he's the guy you have to set picks for and set screens for and use off-ball movement to get him open to take that three-point shot. And then when he gets the ball in his hands, he's automatic from three, like that type of piece. So I think Brady's going to use him in a bunch of different ways, like whether it's just those tear motion, fast motion type things, or if it's, some sweeps or jet motion stuff or orbit motion or lining him up in the backfield and having him just run like wheels or rail routes or those Texas angle routes out of the backfield. I think you're going to see him in a bunch of different ways. And I think that'll also be said for a lot of the guys on this offense, because I think the offense is set up for a coordinator to use their skill sets from a mismatch standpoint, rather than having a Stephon Diggs who it's like, bro, just go win one-on-one and then our quarterback's going to get you the ball. Like, this offense is tailored for a coordinator to use those skill sets and those traits as advantageously as possible in a week-to-week basis based on whatever the defense looks like. And it might be different. This week, it's like the mismatch is Samuel versus this guy in the slot. Or next week, we're going to put him in the backfield and use like this. The week after, Samuel's not getting anything because the mismatch is Knox and Kincaid against their linebackers or second-level defenders, whatever. And I think we see that kind of flow in. And so I think you're going to see a little bit of Samuel everywhere. I don't know how much from a volume standpoint, but I do think you'll see him used as kind of like a chess piece.
And we kind of saw Joe Brady do that in the second half of the year, right? Because you could look at the Dallas game as the most glaring example.
He would line Diggs up in the backfield at times and run him out there too, and Hardy.
Oh, yeah. He did it with Diggs. I fully expect him to do it with Curtis Samuel, by the way, Canoe. I think that's going to happen. I think that was a staple of how Carolina ran things with Joe Brady. And I think Samuel, beyond just being a slot presence, is someone that actually has that juice out of the backfield, where if you are trying to still establish that wrinkle in your offense, but with him, it's someone that has a little bit more speed. I think that's the guy to do it, and I'd be very comfortable with it. How will they use Ray Davis? Also, I think just power back, short yardage situations, but also as a pass catcher. Kind of similar to what they did with Latavius Murray last year in the second half is kind of how I see it going for Davis. I think there will be a pretty steady lean on him. Maybe not as much as I don't think there will ever be as much as James Cook this year unless he gets hurt, knock on wood. But definitely a lean on him where you still need that kind of enforcer back presence and someone that has the hands to catch out of the backfield too. I could see screens with him. I could see throws to the flat to him, but I think really he's going to be that rotational back that you just use to punch people in the mouth and move on. But
sorry, I missed that part too. Yeah, I agree with the Ray Davis piece. I think he gives you a guy that you can legitimately use on all three downs. And he's like, my best way to put Ray Davis is on a scale of 1 to 10, he's like a 6 to a 7 at like everything. So he's not the sexiest in any one area, but he does everything pretty much at an above average level. Gives you a little bit of pass protection, a little bit of juice out of the backfield and pass catching ability, a little bit of power and pop, some explosion and some shiftiness in short areas, and make you miss in a phone booth type deal. And I also think what sets up nice long term, because he's able to do a little bit of everything, he gives you a good skill set as a baseline for when you don't re-sign James Cook in 2 years. Then I'm not even saying that to disrespect. Like, I know. You're not giving running backs like second contracts unless Cook wants to re-sign for like 1 year, $3 million. But when or if James Cook goes, Ray Davis gives you this solid baseline of running back, which means you could pair him with a speed guy, like a huge, downhill bowling ball type of dude, or more of a scat back and a pass catcher, because he has this above average play at several different areas and trait pieces.
And furthering the point you said before too, because like I alluded to, the second half of the season last year was that kind of emphasis from Joe Brady, right? It's game dependent, situationally dependent. And I'm not saying that Ken Dorsey never did this, but rather that I felt like it was more obvious that Joe Brady was trying to do this. And when it didn't work, he was quick to get off of it. I saw it numerous times. But again, that Dallas game where it was James Cook, it was the run concepts were working. Dallas never adjusted. Let's just keep doing it until it doesn't freaking work. Like, that's another thing that I expect for this is just, again, like you said, it's just going to be matchup dependent. It's going to be what is going to work for us that week and who can we lean on? Because then it's something that I think Sean McDermott with his defense and kind of something you've seen them try to trend to, it's more of an amoeba. It's more fluid. It's just let's win the day with however we can do it. And it doesn't need to be force fed through one guy. I think the issue that kind of happened for the Bills too last season, even though it was successful because he's just really freaking good, was becoming too dig centric. And even if feeding the guy does help you win games because you're scoring, racking up yards, getting down the field, at some point teams are taking that away. And you saw the struggles when they started to, and it was kind of leaving Allen to guess, and Allen's brain was scrambled and was missing easy throws over the middle of the field because stylistically they had always just had their guy in Diggs and getting the ball downfield. And now it feels like it's more of a, again, committee of different hands, the all hands team, you and I catching passes. It's trying to have every option be an option, the chemistry be there with everybody, just something that is so fluid that Allen doesn't need to have 40 throws in a game every single week. Allen can have a game like a Dallas game where I think he had like 18 attempts total or even less than that. It might have been even less than that. It was something really light, but it's going to look different each week in the sense that I think how they emphasize their game plan will be different, but everyone's going to be involved and I'm excited for that. And Canoe, thank you so much for the super chat. And real quick, greetings from Albania. That's cool. Thank you for watching from Albania. We appreciate you. Yeah, I don't know what time it is over there, but thank you so much for watching the show from Albania. If you are a Bills fan, go Bills. But if you're just finding a football show over here, thank you for finding us. We appreciate your view. But moving on. God damn it, Thomas. I do like wrestling, by the way. I am starting to come back to it. I watched it as a kid. I am not anti-wrestling. I just need to re-immerse myself because it's been a long time since I've actually watched.
So you're not a huge wrestling fan.
So I am not. I will be eventually. I got to rewatch. I enjoy wrestling and I enjoy seeing the clips. And I was very excited to see Undertaker chokeslam Dwayne The Rock Johnson at WrestleMania. Undertaker is my favorite wrestler of all time. I was there when he took the world championship from Edge back in 2008. I played it as him in SmackDown versus Raw constantly.
Wow.
Listen, I was there once. I'll get back there. But thank you for this, Thomas. Okay. I appreciate that.
I was going to say, if you were like, no, I don't really like wrestling, I was like, that's cool. I'm out.
Ant leaves. Game over. Joe Brady wears Waldo philosophy. This is a good comment too. Is that the purple Cobras logo, by the way, from Dodgeball? I think it is, and that's an awesome profile picture of show. But I apologize for getting sidetracked.
I want to. I'm just paying attention to the chat now. Do you know who Juventud Guerrera is? If you don't, it's okay. I don't expect you to. Oh, man, he's one of the best cruiserweights ever. Oh, this is disappointing. I'm sorry. I
apologize.
This isn't my show. I apologize for bringing up a comment.
No, you're good. The most niche I can get with wrestling was probably like any of the TNA wrestlers like Curry Man or Shark Boy.
Wow, you watched TNA?
TNA I did.
Sick for a while. The X Division and the six-sided ring, man.
And then they ruined it because they had a bunch of the old wrestling heads come in and change the ring to four sides. Yeah, they brought in
Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, and they ruined the whole thing.
Yeah, and then they brought back like some of the ECW dudes, which was like fine because I liked when they were team, the Dudley Bros were Team 3D, and like you had Perk Angle in his second prime over there.
Nice job. They had AJ's, they had prime AJ Styles, man, and they almost ruined him. He had to rebuild his whole image in New Japan before he went to WWE.
Yeah, Kevin Nash was there. There were so many people, but getting sidetracked with the wrestling, it's all good. No, that's my folks. I pulled up Thomas's comment and he's trying to troll, but I do like wrestling. I will start watching it again. Anthony, the wide receiver room, we talked about it briefly, but I want to go more in depth because of the way they constructed it. But again, something that we spoke about earlier was really how this room is constructed and how there's going to be other targets. But talk to me just overall about your view of the room. I know you've made a few comments so far, but with the addition of Keon Coleman, NBS, and other pickup free agents recently, what do you realistically see out of this room as far as how many wide receivers they're going to carry? I know people in the chat have been asking about this and kind of the overall output volume-wise you see from them.
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'll start with what I think is going to, or how many I think. So I think we're sitting there, and as I'm doing that, I'm pulling up this tweet that I put out earlier because it's got my notes for targets in it. Boom, I did that. Awesome segue. I'm going to sit there and say, obviously, so Keon Coleman's going to make it. Curtis Samuel's going to make it. Khalil Shakir is going to make it. I think Matt Collins makes it. Marcus Valdez-Scantling makes it. And that's 5. And then I remember someone's comment from earlier in the chat that wide receiver 6 is going to be a buzzsaw. And I think that's what it is. Wide receiver 6 is going to be a buzzsaw. It could be shorter. It could be Hamler. I don't see it being Chase Claypool. I don't see it being Cephas. I think the top 5 are pretty set right now. Yeah. So I think 6 are going to make it. Especially Matt Collins is making it, not necessarily because of wide receiver stuff, but because of what he does special team stuff. But then also like he can add a certain element. So I'm thinking 5, right? And if that's the case, right, I think Matt Collins makes it. But is he more of your wide receiver 6? And if that's the case, then who's getting more targets than him in those top 5 out of, again, Hamler, Claypool, Cephas? God, there's so many receivers on this friggin' team right now. So I think 6 make it. I think the 5 are pretty set with Coleman, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Matt Collins, and then MVS. And we'll kind of see who else shakes in from that standpoint. And again, when you look at that, it's just like, what do they all have in common? Like, there's pretty much more size than anything. Like with Coleman, with Matt Collins, with Marcus Valdez-Scantling, you've got a certain separation dynamic with Shakir. But you look at this grouping, there's not a ton of separation. There's not a ton of verticality and long speed. Like, Shakir can get vertical, but it's not really his calling card. Samuel can get vertical from a time perspective, but isn't a straight burner. Valdez-Scantling can get vertical, but also offers some other pieces. Like, it's this really interesting wide receiver room and group where you've got like little smatterings and overlappings of skill sets and traits, but not anyone who's overly or holistically dominant in one area, form, or fashion. And that's why I mentioned earlier, like, I think it's going to be on Brady to do all these, like, to take advantage of all these pieces and do the right thing with them. Because again, there's just, the wide receiver room is very levers and buttons based, and you have to push the right buttons and pull the right levers at the right time in order to take advantage of it properly. There is not that cure all, well, I'm just going to hit that button because it's the Stephon Diggs button and it works. And again, all of that from a wide receiver perspective, I still think funnels into the idea of Dalton Kincaid is primary passing option number 1, and this offense from a passing standpoint is going to funnel and flow through Dalton Kincaid. It could be with him attached to the line of scrimmage as a Y tight end. It could be him hipped off as more of an F. It could be him in the slot. It could be him as the single receiver by himself in more of an X role while there's trips to the other side. I think Dalton Kincaid dominates kind of the target share or focus standpoint. And even when you look at it last year for the slow start that he had, regular season and postseason, Stephon Diggs ended up with 175 targets. Dalton Kincaid ended up with 101. And then Gabe Davis was 3rd at 78. So Diggs and Kincaid both cleared 101 targets. But then you look at everybody. Diggs had 175 targets. He's gone. Gabe Davis had 78. He's gone. Latavius Murray had 27. Gone. Sherfield, 26. Gone. Deontay Hardy, 23. Gone. There's a lot of targets up for grabs. I think it's going to start with Kincaid, and then week to week, it will function and funnel through different, or trickle down to different people based on the matchup.
Yeah, I fully agree. And something that I pounded the table for in a show in the past I did, I believe with Bruce Nolan, was I want Kincaid to be your true 2 because, Diggs was still here. And with that
was an awesome 1-2 combination in terms of mismatch. And because a tight end is still, in my opinion, like the greatest mismatch creator from an offensive versus defensive standpoint. And it would be so fun to have that if you also had a true wide receiver 1 on top of it with Diggs, but you don't. So now it just puts more emphasis on that piece.
Yeah, and now that Kincaid's your 1, again, I think one thing that this room reflects to me, it's similar to how I felt with how they constructed their OL room last year, even though it's a different position group, is this is hedging your bets on Kincaid, right? And you kind of expected them to because you took him in the first round. You clearly had the importance to feed him targets, and you saw that in the back half of the year, what it was turning into. And I think now he is your clear-cut 1. I agree with you. And I think that if Kincaid does take that next step concept to be someone that can also, while being a havoc in the middle, stretching the field a bit more and more of those downfield routes for him that you were starting to see them do more often in the second half of the year. I think that's a big boost and kind of gives you a little more of like a breath of relief when you look at the wide receiver room, because I'll keep going back to this point. This room is not the emphasis. It is complementary pieces to an overall goal of fluidity. And when I think about who I want it on it, it's everyone you mentioned. And I think if I'm going my 6, that's just pick your favorite. It honestly, it's like choosing a class in a video game. Like you can't have it all at once. You got to choose one based on your preference. For me, who's the last one? Do you want size? Do you want someone that isn't a separator, but maybe could be a nasty blocker in the trenches? So you got options like, Chase Claypool, or maybe if you want to go Shavers or Justin Shorter, even though unproven blockers, but rather just talking about the size and the frame? Or do you want another gadget speedster because you feel like that component's missing? And for 6, is that Andy Isabella or KJ Hamler, who, I'm not going to lie to you, I have a sneaky suspicion that in their minds, he's higher up on the chart than maybe people are making him out to be, for the fact that maybe they just want to implement another speedster. Someone who, when he has been healthy on the field, keyword when, and it has not been often, has actually shown his flashes and been someone that could be a bit of a mismatch whenever you need him to be. It's more of if you're hedging your bets on him to stay healthy, which I don't think it's just given what you've done recently, not something I'll bank on. So for me, when I talk about the room in, kind of context to how the offense is constructed, my 6, it doesn't matter. But I guess if I had to pick one, if you're like gun to my head, pick one, I think I'm going to say Shorter, because I don't want the Shorter supporters to be mad at me. And also because I just think he's been here. He got hurt. Obviously, you took him in the 5th round last year for the intent of having him in the room, but also probably to play special teams. The familiarity with the team, even though it was Dorsey to start last year, Brady now. I feel like that, to me, I hold that and a lot of value to that, more than I would hold it for someone that's just getting in here. I think while the concept of Claypool is funny, I don't know if he actually makes it. If he does, great. But it feels like to me the 6 wide receiver will probably end up being Shorter. And I think 6 should be the hard cap, because again, at what point are we going to look at it and be like, all right, we can't get the ball to all these freaking dudes this consistently?
Well, special teams is going to factor in so much. Like who's your returner? Are you looking at a receiver to be one of your returners? Is Ty Johnson going to be your returner, and you're constantly going to dress 3 running backs every game? Like we saw down the stretch where it was Cook and Murray and Ty Johnson. So are you dressing 3 running backs every game? Like, again, who's that returner? And if Matt Collins is more of a special teams dude and you're dressing him, like say you only go with 5 wide receivers and Matt Collins is one of those 5, but he's really more of a special teams guy, then you're really only going with 4 receivers. So is that 6th receiver more functioning into the passing aspect of the team versus Matt Collins being dressed as a receiver, but really being more special teams, and maybe he sees some snaps here or there. And that's where I think the conversation piece starts to get really interesting in terms of like building out the room and roster construction. Like, do you keep 6? Do you keep 5? I do think special teams will matter more this year, especially from a return standpoint with the new rules and the change there. So returners are kind of back on the menu a little bit and are in vogue a little bit once again. So it's not just, we just need somebody to catch the ball and fair catch and catch it in the end zone or let it bounce, and then we'll start at the 25, whatever. And again, those dudes function into that. And we know traditionally that Sean McDermott has liked his returners to be more of just like returner only. And if they're a returner and also a receiver, they're going to end up being more of a returner than they are going to be a wide receiver. So that muddies the projection a little bit. And I think you really could, once you factor that in, you can make a case for a bunch of dudes in terms of special teams value and then roster construction at wide receiver.
For sure. And it's why I'm still really pissed that Indy took Anthony Gould from Oregon State, because I thought that was the perfect option for that, because he was quite literally going to be a returner and he's nasty at it. And with the rule change, it was like, oh, there's your guy. Then the Colts took him I think 4 or 5 picks before the Bills. And I was like, you bastards. But I pull up this comment from Roy because I think the one is going to be I think it's going to be Kincaid, right? But when you talk about what are we doing that day? It could really just be the one is the friends we made along the way, in the sense that it's not going to be something you could put too much, like we talked about it, but I also feel like it's not something you can put too much hope into because they're really just, I fully expect them to come out with something new each game. Not that it's not going to be like a brand new offense every game, but like we're going to lean on this. We'll run more motion in this game than this game, more play action in this than this because this team doesn't defend it as well. Or like, hey, let's give our speedster singular a shot to go upfield and make some catches because maybe they're just not good in man and we know he could blow by them. Like, that's how I see it happening. But when I say Kincaid, it's really just because I do think that he is going to be the focal point as far as like the room of pass catchers. And I have a take, Anthony. I want to ask you this. I have said that I don't think the top 3 in targets are going to all be receivers. In fact, I think only one of them is going to be a wide receiver. Do you agree or disagree with this? Putting you on the spot.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that because I think one of them is going to be Kincaid, and I think one of them is going to be James Cook.
Yeah, I think so too. Kincaid, Cook, and then I think my 3. I think it might. Is it Coleman? Like, is it Keon Coleman? Is he going to do that in his first year? Is it going to be like you? I wanted to say Shakir before I said Coleman, but there's something in me that also says like, well, Brandon Beane's talked about him being an X. Brandon Beane has said he's lining out wide and being that guy. Like, is he going to be a focal point too? Like,
I need to see real reps before I can decide. He's just too raw as a route runner and within his stem work for me to like know how to project him at any point right now. Like the size plays, the athleticism plays, the hand strength and the contested catchability. Yes, I know it was only 33% last year, but it was 65.2% the year before, yada, yada. Like, I think a lot of his size, frame, plus athleticism translates. He's just real raw and unrefined when it comes to releases, when it comes to stem work, when it comes to his breaks and just everything. Like when he wins in the stem or wins with his routes, it's still due to physicality paired with athleticism. So I really could see a world where he takes off immediately and it's like, man, why haven't we had this type of skill set in the Bills offense before? This is working tremendously. Or you're sitting there at week 4 or 5 and we're still talking about like, is this the week that Keon Coleman gets involved? Is this the week that Keon Coleman gets involved versus Khalil Shakir, who has that skill set that we know works with Josh Allen? He's a separator. He understands leverage. If anything, when Shakir started getting more work, Allen was doing him a disservice. Allen was throwing balls like everywhere around Khalil Shakir, like off frame, low, high. Shakir was having to reach behind him, even on like bubble screens and stuff, and scrape balls off the ground. So he's QB friendly with his skill set and how he works, and also has somewhat of a rapport and a known quantity with the type of guys that Josh Allen's worked with before. You could make a case for a bunch of the dudes, but right now I'm just going to go with Shakir. I guess Samuel's an outside dark horse, but I just see him more of a schematic chess piece more than just like a traditional target share kind of guy.
And when talking about Coleman specifically, you bring up being a quarterback friendly guy. That's something that I think you take into account when you talk about target share for Keon Coleman too, because how often is Josh Allen going off script? Like, and I think it's something that they genuinely rely on because he can do it and he could do it almost as good, if not the best in the league. I think with Keon Coleman, I agree that it probably will more likely be Shakir than Coleman. But if you're talking like, well, okay, plays break down, it's well covered, Allen gets extra time and he's rolling to his right, I think he's looking for Coleman every single time, unless there's a wide open step from Kincaid or MVS deep down the field, because Coleman's got that frame. And if he just, vacates wherever he was supposed to go and the DB doesn't, whether he's on him at the hip or whether he's got a little bit of a step on him, Coleman to me is the type of guy where if I'm firing a 20-yard pass at you full speed, even if you got like an inch of separation, I think he's the type of guy who can haul it in. And I think Josh will look to that and try to depend on that at times, which is why I could see it. But I'll agree with you and say that I think it's more likely Shakir. And I want to pull up Carl's comment, who super chatted. Thank you so much, Carl. What will Brandon Beane do with the $10.2 million Trey White money on 6-1? Do you think anything significant, Anthony, or do you think this is going to just be sign your draft picks and, maybe like a fringe roster guy?
I wonder, like, I like the Smoot signing in terms of a guy who can compete to be like edge for you. If that hadn't happened, I would sit here and be like, they're going to go after like Marcus Golden or somebody at edge, because the edge grouping still scares me and worries me right now. I think you're probably going to see a couple of moves to mitigate some holes. Maybe they sign another corner. Maybe they sign another edge. Maybe they sign another offensive lineman. Maybe they sign another 4 receivers at like $1.5 million each or whatever the hell they want to do. I think it's going to be more kind of just rounding things out, moving the floor a little bit. But I am holding out hope that there is another Leonard Floyd type of move out there for this team. That happened last year. Floyd was brought in June and was tremendously valuable for the first half of the year. And I know he fell apart a little bit down the stretch, but I think he was injured and banged up in ways that we didn't potentially or necessarily know. So I'm hoping that kind of move exists because they could use some reinforcements in several areas, just given what the roster still looks like now at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I'm hoping that, because I know that a lot of that money has to go over to over to your draft picks. I also know that they had to compromise. I think it was $3 million of it because of Stephon Diggs. So you have kind of a tighter budget now, and I just don't foresee anything of major significance happening unless you were somehow able to pull some sort of trade where you could backload the money once your cap expands. But I think with the roster now, it's probably just going to be like a 1-year deal for an edge rusher. I don't even know who's still on the market. I haven't checked in a long time, but I agree too, even though this is an offensive episode when we talk about the edge room, that it's a bit thin. I've been hyped on, Javon Solomon, who I've praised on the show last week, I believe, and like other members, but it really is an unproven room and definitely one that when you talk about long-term pieces, there aren't that many. So I'm hoping that that's the direction they go here, but going in more of an offensive direction again, I want to just bring this back to kind of one of the final topics that I had on here, and it's really talking about the future of this offense too. Now, we have a whole season of I heard the honk, I'm sorry. We have a whole season
wild on the street today. It's been like this for the last like 4 or 5 hours. It never happens. And that's why I left the windows open, which I never do. But it's warm today and I don't have the AC on. I was like, I don't feel like sweating my ass off here. And I was like, it's fine. It's usually quiet outside. And I did a pod appearance before this. And like 5 minutes in, like some van was like hollering down the street. And I was like, oh, you fucking kidding me? Like, I'm so sorry. Funny. I'm just going to mute myself until I have to speak.
No, you're good, man. I'm picturing like you look out Anthony's window and it's just like a Fast and Furious, like a Tokyo Drift style.
It's a Fury Road type of situation out there. That's what it is.
There's just 6 dudes in the back of a pickup truck with a loud speaker and a guitar.
Yeah, but I'll say some dudes playing guitar and everybody's chasing each other down the street. That's exactly what's happening.
Just so funny.
Also, real quick, do you know the dude who directed Fury Road and like Mad Max and all that whole series, George Miller, also directed Happy Feet?
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's incredible. Those movies are really similar. And what that means is they're in the same universe. That's the thing. Imagine just Happy Feet universe in Antarctica. There's just these happy penguins, and then dystopian different part of the world. There's just dudes and trucks and guitars.
I just want to see a version of Mad Max where all the people. It's the same movie, same plot, same everything, but it's just penguins instead of humans.
Yeah, oh my god, and Happy Feet is the Mad Max cast in Antarctica.
Yes,
yeah.
Happy Feet and Mad Max. They all put a little leather jacket on little fuzzy Happy Feet. Oh man, give it to me.
I could picture the plot being like, oh no, we don't have any coats because everything we wear is basically just leather straps. How do we stay warm? Guys, I have an idea. And then they just start tap dancing for warmth and it ends up working out for them. Okay, back to the topic. Right. I love when you come on the show because I absolutely love the banter we have back and forth. So I appreciate you because I haven't thought about Happy Feet in like a decade.
Dude, I'm sorry. So he did. This is wild. I'm sorry. He did all 3 Mad Maxes, Mad Max, Mad Max 2, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, then a couple movies, then did Babe, Pig in the City, Happy Feet. Listen to this 3-year stretch. No, I'm sorry. This multiple movie stretch. Babe, Pig in the City, Happy Feet 2, Mad Max Fury Road. And he was the director, writer, and producer on all of those most recent ones. And he was the director and writer for all 3 Mad Maxes and the producer for also Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome.
Oh my God, I'm crying. I'm sorry. But dude, how do you go from Babe in the Big City to Happy Feet? And who came up to him and was like, all right, I saw your last few movies. You gotta do Mad Max.
I just don't know how you get to that. You were like, yeah, like, wait, aren't you George Miller, the Mad Max guy? Yeah. All right, what movie do you want to make? Listen, he's a penguin, all right? And he dances. And everybody's like, is this like another Mad Max? He did, yeah, both Babes. He wasn't the director for the first Babe, but he was a writer and producer. Yeah, man.
That is absolutely incredible, and I'm so glad I learned that. I'm actually got tears in my eyes because I wasn't prepared. When you said before Happy Feet, I was thinking like, all right, it's got to be like something in the middle because there's no way this dude just went from children's movies to Mad Max. And it's
no, it was the opposite. He went from Mad Max to being like Babe Pig in the City, Happy Feet, and then was just biding his time to do Fury Road, which was also Fury Road was supposed to happen in 2001. But the funding, everything went sideways once 9/11 happened, and it made the American dollar drop versus the Australian dollar. I read this all on a Twitter thread today. It was absolutely amazing.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah, it was. So fun fact for I know that's why everybody's here. Oh yes, I like the Snowmobile Fury. Welcome to the Ice Dome. That's the Happy Feet version of Mad Max. I love it.
Dude, why are we not funding this? Like, you could easily make each opposite version of the movie and then a collaborative movie that happens like an Avengers-style event where the Happy Feet cast and the Mad Max cast get together with the huge dancing scene at the end. Okay.
Yes.
I am reeling. I feel so... Oh, that's great. I was not prepared to learn that, and I am happy I did. But so, the wide receiver room... And I wanted to ask you this question about the future of the offense. We obviously haven't seen what Joe Brady has put on the field. We've only seen the tendencies, what he likes to call some of his behavior. One thing I think you can expect from them next year, like you alluded to, more of those heavy sets, trying more of a physical approach, kind of game-dependent matchups. And one thing that we didn't talk about was motion, which I think is also going to receive a significant uptick because I know Carolina was running a significant amount of motion, both on passes and runs back when Joe Brady was the offensive coordinator. So before I get to my next question, I just want to ask your thoughts on that real fast. How often do you see them running it? How significant do you think it is? And who are some of the guys you think could be a part of that?
In terms of motion?
Yes. Sorry.
No, you're good. I think I'm actually, as I'm speaking, I'm pulling up the numbers right now so I can see the splits. I think Curtis Samuel is an obvious candidate for that in terms of pre-snap motion, just what you can do with him. I think Shakir could be a potential movement piece. And it also depends on too, what if you're talking about motion versus just like a traditional like shift. Because like anybody and everyone could have like the shift pieces. If you're talking about like traditional motion in terms of like what Miami's doing and those type of dudes, I think Samuel is the prime candidate for that. You are taking Curtis Samuel and you are moving him like anywhere and everywhere and doing all this crazy stuff with him. And I think Shakir falls into that boat as well. Yeah, just because traditionally, like you want to use that to create like leverage in space for those type of dudes. And those are like the prime guys who would have the speed to potentially take advantage of it. I guess if Hamler makes the squad, like that's a guy who can potentially fall into that as well a little bit. But I would look more towards Curtis Samuel first and foremost, and then everybody else are like little like smatterings and pieces here and there.
Right. I can foresee that. And there was another piece of it because I was rewatching some of the games from this past year. And I remember seeing Miami using Chase Claypool in motion at times to use him as a blocker on certain running formations. That's something that I thought would be interesting too, was if the team decided that if they really want to enforce the run and one of these fringe roster guys who has a bigger frame might be someone that they actually use as just a decoy to get him and accelerate him to be a blocker down the field to clear.
The Bills did that with Sherfield down the stretch. They even just as in motion to lie, and then they'd run weak side zone to the other side. They did it a bunch against the Chargers. But whoever wins that role, like you could see MVS doing that, and he's leading the block out in front, or Keon Coleman is leading the block out in front. Like, so that's 100% a possibility. Good thought.
Yeah. And I hope they continue that on, because I mean, just talking about having that big body to lend itself as the extra blocker and what that could do for a running room where you already know the is formidability a word? How formidable James Cook is. We're going to pretend it was, or pretend it is. But you know what James Cook can do. I really love this idea for someone like Ray Davis, too, who's already a bruiser, because if you are mauling people downfield and then introducing Davis to get him to the second level, and you already know what he can bring to the table as far as physicality, I think that's just a fun wrinkle in this Bills offense that could be something beneficial. You'll see next season a big part of what I think Joe Brady might trot out, and ultimately being part of the identity shift where you are getting more physical, are making teams respect you, and using that as a ploy, like you said, to get those one high, get those single deep, and be able to air the ball out a little bit easier. But
real quick,
second part, sorry.
No, you're good. So the Bills finished last year, regular season wise, with a 45% motion rate, which was 23rd They had a 61% usage when it came to the pass, which was 12th, and then a 39% usage rate when it came to the run, which was 21st. Something about those numbers didn't necessarily add up. But then when I filter it for Brady's time as OC, they were 47% overall motion rate, which was 21st. So they went up 2 percentage points and they went up 2 spots in the rankings. So there wasn't a dramatic difference with motion of Brady versus Dorsey. That was actually one of my things. Like when I that's why I looked it up. Like I remember when people were like, man, Brady is so much better than Dorsey. There's so much more motion in this offense. And I was like, no, there's really not. It's 2 percentage point, which can be significant, like a 2 percentage point difference, but it's less games from a regular season standpoint. But I also don't think the personnel necessarily gave you that, be like, hey, this is a personnel group. Like this is a group we should use motion with. So I wonder how it shift now, if that'll change.
Yeah, I'm curious to see that too. And real fast, Truth to Hearts, thank you so much. Everybody, you've been so kind tonight. Truly, truly appreciate it. And Truth to Heart says, is there a chance we use 4 wide? I think our weapons fit into that perfectly. 2 big wide, 2 slot. It's interesting. What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a personnel grouping or formational piece that this team won't try and work. And I do think the 4 wide aspect too, because you're trying to create the schematic advantage. So say you put 4 wide receivers on the field. Is the defense answering with nickel and are they answering with dime? And then if you have 4 wide receivers who are, say you do 4 wide and it's, again, you have to be able to prove that you can use it from a pass perspective to make defenses have to match you with that personnel grouping defensively. But say the 4 wide receivers are Keon Coleman, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Mac Hollins, and I don't know, Justin Shorter or Chase Claypool or whoever. Then you're looking at like 4 dudes. It's like, okay, are they going to pass it, or is this really just going to play out like a 12 personnel formation? And even though it's 4 wide, like you're using more heavier personnel alignments and formations, even though your personnel grouping is a 4 wide set. So it'll come down to them being able to show they can live in the light and the dark in terms of being physical and active as run blockers, but also threats in the passing game. But that's where you start to really get fun, because then you're forcing the defense to have to answer these questions that they don't want to have to answer because they're complicated and difficult.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually agree with Spin's comment here too. And something I was going to say was, I think it's just makes more sense to use Kincaid because that's what you want. You want to have
that's a conversation too from last year. Like, if you stay in 12, it's a defense using nickel. Do they have to bring in a big nickel like a safety or a linebacker? Can that safety or linebacker, are they athletic enough to cover Kincaid? If it's a nickel corner, are they physical enough to deal with him if he run blocks? Like, again, you make them answer those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And another good comment from Walter. There isn't a combination of 4 wide receivers I'd rather have on the field at any point. I feel over Kincaid staying in, which I firmly agree. Kincaid to me is a focal point. Again, when you're talking about any formation and you're talking about physical presence, even though he's not the most physical guy, but you just want his frame on the field with his
physical
fluidity.
enough. He's physical enough. Yeah. He gets the job done and he's willing in that area. And that's all you need considering how good he is as a pass catcher.
Yes, and having him on the field is better than not having him on the field, which that's the message I want you all to take away from today's episode. Everything we said, throw it out the window except the happy feet part. Kincaid is good to have on the field. But so I want to wrap the show up really just with one final question, just something that, if you want to give me like actual estimates of what you could predict. I know we talked about target share. We talked about people that we could see as the main 3, but when we talk about receiving yards leaders and kind of the range of numbers you could see with guys like Kincaid, guys like Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman, I guess I'll ask you, like, who do you think are your top as far as overall yardage, overall production? You could vary it from receiving yards, touchdowns, however you feel like doing this. But I was just curious if you have that, like something you thought of already, or if you're still kind of just waiting to see what the season looks like and how they construct this offense.
I am definitely waiting because I just think that the nature and notion of the offense is going to change a little bit, but I like this game, so I'll play along. Are we talking just from a regular season perspective?
Yeah, regular season.
Okay.
God, I hope we still make the playoffs.
Right? I'm just going to look at numbers from last year. All right, cool. So Kincaid. So I'm going to start with Kincaid because I think he's going to be tops for a lot of this conversation, like we've already said. Kincaid finished last year with 73, regular season only, 73 catches, 673 yards, and 2 tutties.
Mm-hmm.
I think he is the receptions leader for the year.
Yep.
I think he's going to push 100 catches. I think 90. Diggs had 107 last year, and that's with the downturn going down the back end of the year where his usage was weird. And the usage wasn't because he's washed. I'm going to say that every chance I get. He's out there beating Ramsey and L'Jarius Sneed and all this stuff and getting open, and he's either not part of the progression or Allen is choosing to go somewhere else, or he's open on the left side and Dawkins gets beat, or he's open on the right side and Spencer Brown or Torrance gets beat. There's a whole bunch of things.
Or Allen misses him.
Yes, or Allen misses him. Another fair point. So Diggs finished with 107 catches. Yeah, I don't want to put too much on a Kincaid. I'm going to say Kincaid finishes with around, I think 90 to 100 catches is safe for Kincaid. Yards is going to be tough though, because I don't know how much vertical and intermediate chunk plays he's going to generate, but I think 90 to 100 catches for Kincaid and 900 to 1,000 yards is doable. I think he's both the receptions leader and the yardage leader for the Bills from a pass catching standpoint in this season. And then from a receiver perspective, I think Shakir will be the leader in targets. I think he'll be the leader in catches. I think Curtis Samuel will be the leader in yards. And I think Keon Coleman's going to lead them in touchdowns from a receiver standpoint, but also overall.
You said what I was thinking again. I was gonna drop that as the bomb. I was gonna be like, I think Keon Coleman's gonna have the most touchdowns in the receiving room. And I do agree with you. I think that is likely just because I think that's where Keon Coleman's skill set will really shine. Because when you talk about just his frame alone, that's already a net positive. If you're talking any contested ball that you might throw up in the end zone. I don't know how often they're planning on running any sort of fade there. But if they do, I trust Coleman in that regard. You've seen him do it successfully in college, both at Michigan State and FSU. But I think, again, short area quickness, that lateral agility, even though he's not the most polished guy, I do think that is in his arsenal right now. And you saw on some of his film when he was in college, his ability to separate in that regard, especially on slants. I think that's something he's really strong at, especially with this big frame. Like, I could absolutely see Coleman leading receiving room in touchdowns. But yes, receptions leader, I think it's going to be Dalton Kincaid. Yards leader, I think it'll probably be Kincaid. I said in the range last week of about like 800 to 1,000. I think like I'm banking on it being on the lower side of that, like being in between like 800-900 more so, because I think that it'll either be a mix of how often they're distributing this ball out or how often they're running in certain situations, which might mean less attempts for Josh, less volume and all the receiving accolades you can get on this offense, but still productive. Kind of my idea of like, it doesn't matter if they didn't have 1,000 yards, they're still being a contributor and helping out. But receiving room, as far as overall yardage, I'm going to flip it and I'm going to say Curtis Samuel. I think Curtis Samuel,
not including Dalton Kincaid, right? Because you're just saying receiver room.
Not including Dalton Kincaid. No, this receiving room specifically. Yep. Please don't quote me, clip me, people in the chat saying that I don't think Dalton Kincaid's leading in yards. I love Dalton Kincaid. But I think Curtis Samuel for the receiving room is going to have the most yards. And I think that's going to be just because, again, how often he will be used by Joe Brady in certain situations where he's going to be put to get open. Honestly, how often he's going to be in the slot. I love Shakir. I think Shakir could pan out. This is not a knock on Khalil Shakir, who I think is also emerging as a very reliable slot target. And I also think that Shakir is probably going to be asked to go upfield a bit. I honestly think that alone, even though Samuel is too, I trust Samuel a bit more when they're going to ask him to go upfield if they're lining him up in more niche spots, like in the backfield, out wide, in the slot. I think he is going to be a bit more of a gadget piece than Shakir will be, and in turn lend himself to get open in certain situations more than Shakir will. Again, not a knock on Khalil Shakir, but rather that Curtis Samuel to me feels like Joe Brady's favorite toy that he's going to use a ton in different situations, which will help his volume and his yardage. So
I can see it with more chunks. Like I could see Samuel only had 3 catches today, but he had like 3 catches for 65 yards.
Right.
And then Shakir had like 5 catches for 55 yards. Like I just think they're going to operate. Granted, Samuel works traditionally like not as downfield as people might think, given his speed, but I think given the scheme ability and his yard after catch ability and the athleticism and speed, I think that pairs with it where he catches a ball at 7 yards, but takes it for like 20.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see situations where it's like literally a screen that he'll take for like 30 yards too. Like I see a ton. And that's really where I'm coming from is like, it's not that Shakir isn't going to be involved or acclimated. It's that the versatility of Curtis Samuel and how often Joe Brady got him involved in Carolina and the success he had because he had a mixture of 1,000 yards from his receiving and rushing. I think that that's really going to be a part of it. So he will be my leader in yards. I have Coleman as my leader in touchdowns, and I think it will be Samuel as my leader in receptions as well for the receiving room. Receiving room, not tight ends.
And I think honestly,
he's on an island.
That's fair. Like I don't in a year where Brady is now the full-time OC and has experience with this offense already, them going out and getting Curtis Samuel, somebody he worked with already, like I just don't see that happening if he's like, yeah, I'm just going to use him sparingly. Like that's an important, like you going out and getting a dude you've already worked with in the first year of you being an OC with this team. And then you also trade Stephon Diggs. Like I just don't, if Diggs was still here, I think it's a different question entirely, obviously. Of course. But like it just signs point to him being like, okay, that's going to be like my guy in some form or fashion. Now, my guy might only mean, 5 targets a game, but they're important targets or they're important situations and they yield big results.
Shout out to Chase Claypool's burner for joining us tonight. I'm just kidding. No, but I appreciate you watching Baked Bills fan, and I appreciate the Chase Claypool commitment. I hope he's good. I don't have expectations, but I hope he's good. That'd be nice. A nice plus.
He just made, you got to make the team first.
And I'm bringing this comment up before we wrap things up, because I know you got to do your show in 13 minutes, and I want to be mindful of that. If Samuel is our leader in receiving yards, God save us. But again, look at the context of the offense. And I want to say this, that this is a nice way to wrap up the wide receiver conversation too, with the point I've been trying to reiterate. This construction of this wide receiver room works in tandem with how they've built their tight end room up, how they've built their running back room up, how often they plan on running the ball, who can block while they're running the ball, how often Josh Allen is running. Like, if Curtis Samuel leads your receiving room in receiving yards, in receptions, whatever it is, that's not a bad thing, because if the offense is productive as a whole, it's productive. We're scoring touchdowns. We're moving the ball. If we end the year, Curtis Samuel has 896 yards. That's a really specific number. I don't know why I said that. I think I'm seeing it
specific, man.
I'm seeing into the future. But let's just say that. Like, he does that and he has like 5 touchdowns or 4 touchdowns.
Specific.
I don't know where I got. I'm telling you, I plucked that from the future.
Bookmark this, because if he somehow does it, that would just be the pull of the year that you called it on May 14th.
Then for a full year, my name will be Joe Stradamus. I will never change it, and that's how we'll do it. But that's not a bad thing if the offense is productive. It was kind of my conversation, even though it didn't pan out, with Gabe Davis last year. Like, if Gabe had 700 yards, but 700 yards were helping the rest of the offense, then I don't care if he didn't touch the 1,000 mark. I care about how productive he is and when he's coming in and how much he helps out. And even though it didn't work that way, that philosophy will translate for me to every single receiver. Get involved, do your job, move the ball down the field, be a successful offense, be ungovernable, be chaotic like Mad Max Fury Road / Happy Feet, and you will be successful. And it doesn't matter about the raw data, because at the end of the day, you're still going to have teams respect you defensively, and you'll still be a tough team to stop. Just wanted to go on that rant. I apologize.
I think that's fine.
And let's wrap it up. I want to ask you, wait real fast. Carl, another $2. Thank you so much, Carl. Appreciate you. Who will JA generate explosive plays with in 24? The friends he made along the way. Everybody. I
think you also have the thing too, like technically an explosive play counts as, I think passing is depending on who you go. Some people say 25, some people say 20. I do it as 20 for passes and 10 for runs. I think it's going to be Kincaid. I think it's going to be Samuel. Like, because again, think of an explosive, like Kincaid gets matched up one-on-one with a linebacker or a safety who he knows he can take, and then he catches a 22-yard pass. Like, that counts as an explosive play. Now, it might not be a 50-yard bomb, but it's a good chunk play in the intermediate. So Kincaid, I think Samuel, Cook, I think, is going to generate explosives, but in the run, he could necessarily, potentially in the pass game as well. But I think it's really, you're looking at Kincaid from a mismatch standpoint, and then Samuel with his athleticism and scheme a bit. Like, you're scheming Curtis Samuel to generate explosives. Like, you're not scheming Curtis Samuel to get you like a 7-yard catch or an 8-yard catch. Like, you're scheming him to get you 15 plus. So I think he's got to be in that conversation.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think just for Josh Allen tendency's sake, not even saying that this is something that Joe Brady would want, but maybe because Josh Allen turns into a golden retriever sometimes and wants the explosive play. But MVS might be on the other end of a few explosive plays as well. Like, he is a deep threat. That is his game. They're going to ask him to go upfield. At some point, Josh Allen's going to lick his lips and say, OMG, deep threat. I'm going to throw the ball. Let's see what happens. Will it be an interception? Half the time, probably, but it'll still be an attempt. And other times it might be an explosive play. So I think MVS would be in that conversation, but it's far more likely that it's going to stem from Shakir, Samuel, Kincaid to be your big three. And obviously James Cook, if you can get him something quick out the backfield, or some of those pesky little wheel routes that I love. But on that note, Ant, I'm going to wrap up this conversation by asking you one final thing, which is your final thoughts on the offense in 2024. Your final, anything you want to say on it that you feel like we didn't cover enough, really just a good summary of how you're feeling about it.
I'm whelmed with a lot of it. I think we're going to see a different direction for the offense. I think the run game is going to be important, or it should be important. And we kind of let things play out. I don't think there's, positively or negatively, I don't think there's much to do right now about getting super high on the offense or getting super down on the offense. It's a different direction from a wide receiver building standpoint. It's a different offense from a coordinator standpoint and potential direction standpoint. And it's all within the larger scale and grander scheme of how things are working out structurally and schematically across football nowadays. So there's a lot of changes that I think are going to happen with the offense, positively and negatively. And we just kind of let the cards fall where they may. That doesn't mean people can't predict things or have feelings or opinions on it, but I think getting too worked up one way or the other, positively or negatively, like Keon Coleman is a great example. So many people were so down on him when he got picked. This guy sucks. It's never going to work out. And then he did 2 interviews and everybody thought he was so charismatic. And people were like, he's going to succeed here and he's going to be amazing. We have no idea what he's going to be. He has a tremendous amount of variance in terms of what he can be because of his size and athleticism and frame profile versus how raw and he is and the lack of refinement he has. So I think you kind of just got to let things play out, try to find as many breadcrumbs and puzzle pieces as you can. But either way, it's going to be an important year because the pivots that they make are going to lead to a new direction positively, or the pivots that they make fall and suck. And Brady is not the crown prince that so many people want to label him as. And you're sitting here maybe again looking at a new direction coming out of the offense next year and or reshaping and revamping some things offensively come free agency in the draft next year.
Yeah, and to finalize that point, which again, I think this is something I'll say all offseason while we still have it. Go into the season with an open mind of what to expect. And that's not a bad thing because, like you said, it could flourish. It could be great if they decide that they want to, maybe add a tick into their running game and run a bit more often with some different concepts, or at the very least, different looks, get more people involved in blocking, maybe not be as pass happy and predictable as they've been in the past. Or maybe it's a fun little mixture of, certain run concepts that they use a lot more play action on, and then they end up airing this ball downfield in a different way and proving that you didn't have to have all these archetypes you set out for them in the offseason to be successful and to be explosive. Or it could fall flat. And I think that just not having too high of expectations, not because it's going to be bad, but because you're boxing yourself into a corner of what you really think it's going to look like when it's hard to say what it'll truly look like, is something that I don't think I'm going to do. I'm just going to go into it and say, hey, let's see what happens. I'm hoping this is good because this definitely feels like a transitional year. But if the pieces click and they get good production out of a lot of their new acquisitions, it could be a very fun, successful year, and the Bills could be back to where they've been in years past with hopefully an ability to get over the hump. But Anthony, I truly appreciate you joining me tonight. I love the conversations we have. I am going to continue to look into that Mad Max Babe hybrid direction because that is genuinely, I haven't stopped thinking about it since you brought it up because that's the funniest thing I've heard all day.
I read it earlier today and I was like, this can't be right. And even when I said it to you, I hadn't fact checked it and I immediately looked it up and I was like, oh my God, it is true.
I'm glad it is true, but I want you to tell our chat where they're going to be able to find you in 5 minutes and what you got going on.
Sure. Yeah. I host Disguise coverage here on the Cover One YouTube channel live every Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. So in about 5-6 minutes from now, doing a mailbag episode, put a tweet out earlier, got some responses there, and then a bunch of DMs. So questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, anything and everything with the Bills roster. Also from a live chat perspective, I just love the engagement. I've talked about doing this kind of episode before. So if you want to get involved, whatever is on your mind, good, bad, ugly, pretty, anything and everything for the Buffalo Bills, join me at 9 p.m. Eastern in about 5 minutes from now with whatever is on your mind. Like, this episode is purely just engagement driven. I always bring up a lot of stuff from the live chat, but it's purely just live chat, comments and DMs from Twitter that were sent my way. This episode is just comprised of all the viewers and listeners and anything and everything. So a giant engaging conversation live here in a couple minutes at 9. And then I do the Cover One Film Room live with Eric Turner every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. And then you can find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro_ANT. And then, of course, all the shows that I do are uploaded to all the podcasting apps as soon as the live show on YouTube is done.
Appreciate you, Ant. Every time you come on the show again, it's an insightful discussion. I appreciate you being welcoming to me, asking you a million questions. It means the world. And guys, if you are not watching Disguise coverage, go do it. I watch it every time my show ends while I'm cutting my post-show stuff and eating dinner. It is well worth your time. You will learn a lot. And the engagement from Anthony and the banter with the comments is great. You will see that in a few minutes. But for me, I am out. I'm going to go eat dinner and do all my show stuff. Chat, you were great. To all of you who super chatted, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate all of the discussion, the engagement. If you could be as kind as to drop a like on this video, share with your friends, and check us out on the podcasting platforms, it would be greatly appreciated. But happy Tuesday. Go Bills. Appreciate and love you all. Have a great night, and we will see you soon.